For the first time in my life, I showed up to an airport without really knowing where to go, or even if I had a confirmed ticket. Welcome to Tokyo's Narita Airport. We're here at Hotel Nikko Narita, which is just across the street. We're going to hop on our shuttle over to Terminal 1 and get on board Aero Mongolia, who claims themselves to be the leading national carrier of Mongolia, despite not being a flag carrier even. Aero Mongolia is a national airline in Mongolia that's based in Ulaanbaatar, which is the main capital of Mongolia. They fly almost entirely a fleet of Embraer 135s, and interestingly enough actually, it's still to this day said that this flight was supposed to be operated by an Embraer 135, despite this route being 6 hours in length, which is much longer than the maximum length of the Embraer 135. They do, however, have one A319 that they recently acquired from Brussels Airlines, and so doing some research, I was able to find out that that would be the plane I would be on, even though it wasn't published anywhere. Now, I mean it when I say that I really couldn't buy a ticket for this flight. You can only buy a ticket on their website if you're on their Mongolian website and on the Mongolian language portion of their website. As soon as you switch the language to English or go to the .com version, you can no longer purchase a ticket from their website. I ended up being able to go through a third-party system. However, the flight wasn't even labeled as an Aero Mongolia flight. It was labeled as a Han Air Systems, which is a German charter airline. That being said, based on the flight times and the aircraft type, I was able to infer that this would correctly be the flight that I was looking for. So I booked it regardless, showed up at the airport without having any confirmation that this was actually the flight that I wanted. I just knew what airport to be at and what time. Now, I warily went up to the counter and gave them my passport, but they actually had no issue finding my ticket. Here's my boarding pass for this flight. You'll notice there's no barcode. They actually don't print these while you're there. They print these ahead of time and have a whole stack of boarding passes and sift through them to find my name. You can see that I asked to change my seat to a window seat, and so rather than printing me a new boarding pass, since they didn't have that capability, they just had to white out the old seat that I had and write in my new seat. This is also the luggage tag that was given. As a matter of fact, this is the carbon copy of it. They slapped the main copy on my bag, but you'll see here it's a paper all Nippon luggage tag. These are actually the emergency tags that are put on bags, whether gate checked or if Narita were to run out of luggage tags, this is what they would use. So it appears that Aero Mongolia is borrowing these from All Nippon. Now, pre-security, there's a number of shops and restaurants. As a matter of fact, my favorite udon is actually in this area of Narita's Terminal 1. But what we're really here for is to head upstairs to level 5 to the observation deck. This observation deck is outside security, so therefore open to the public, and since there's all that shopping and restaurants right outside, you can feel free to grab some food or some shopping and then come out and hang out on the patio to watch some airplanes or maybe watch your friends or family take off or land. My nerves of not having a flight when I got here had gone away now that I had a boarding pass in hand, and up on the board I could see the Aero Mongolia flight to Ulaanbaatar. I also apologize if I'm butchering that name. I heard it Ulaanbaatar, and all different variations of that. So, if you have the correct way to say it, please let me know down in the comments because I am very curious. Aero Mongolia's fleet is all economy. There is no business class cabin, and so therefore there is no lounge access. Narita does have a couple paid access lounges that you are welcome to access no matter which airline or cabin you're flying. However, since I had limited amount of time, I decided I'd go find my gate and maybe just grab a quick bite to eat. We're going to be gate 26 today. Interestingly enough, all the aircraft around me were SkyTeam. However, obviously Aero Mongolia, since it's barely an airline, doesn't actually have any codeshare agreements. Now, walking around Narita's Terminal 1, there is actually plenty of food options, whether you want fast food like McDonald's or KFC, or if you're looking for something that's maybe a little bit more of a sit-down style. Personally, this is my favorite option. It's a ramen restaurant. They have both sit-down or takeout options. And for the very first time, I got a good glance of my Aero Mongolia A319 arriving in from Ulaanbaatar. Now this was, interestingly enough, scheduled for a 35-minute turn, meaning they had to deplane all these passengers to get them off to customs, get the airplane ready for this next international flight, and then board us. They only actually left us 15 minutes for boarding, but surprisingly, because the flight wasn't all that busy, they were able to get us off without a hitch. Another thing you'll realize if you're sitting around waiting for your plane at Narita is that the rampers, every time they push an airplane back, they wave it off as it starts to taxi away, which is just a fun little touch here. But soon it was time for boarding, and since there is no business class and there is no status and mileage plan, basically everybody boards at the same time. Luckily, the flight was probably only about half full, maybe a little over half full, so there wasn't too many people, but there was a big long line and a big cluster to get in the jet bridge. The A319 that's going to be taking us to Mongolia today is the only one in Aero Mongolia's fleet. The rest of their fleet consists of Embraer 135s. Now this specific A319 actually came from Brussels Airlines, where it was for about 6 years until Aero Mongolia picked it up in late 2021. Prior to that, it hopped around between a couple of airlines, but the fun thing is, and the reason I bring that up, is because you will notice around the cabin little remnants of its time at Brussels Airlines, like the pins for the remove before flight, and here where the flight attendant's control screen is. Now, the legroom situation in most of these seats is horrendous. It's pretty much the same as like a US ultra low cost carrier. My travel hack for you though is that I was seated in the exit row, and the exit row had more than enough room, especially considering there was nobody sitting next to me. That being said, since you can't book your flight online or check in for your flight online, there's no way to reserve that seat ahead of time, but you can always ask when you get to the counter. Now, there's no published stats of how big these seats actually are, but I can tell you that most average people sitting around this cabin were cramped and kind of had their legs bowed out to the side. In the exit row, however, here you can see I had plenty of room for my legs and my knees, and you can see here it was probably about 6 inches or so from my knees to the seat in front of me, and considering there was nobody next to me because the flight had plenty of empty seats, I was able to fully spread out. Now the seat cushions, same thing like you'll find on Allegiant and Spirit nowadays, with about a ½ inch of cushion, but that just seems to be the standard. In the seat back pocket in front of you, you'll find a safety card, but more importantly, you're going to find this card here that explains that you're seated in the exit row, and it explains your duties, and if you don't want them, to ask a flight attendant to be moved. After the flight attendants actually told us how to open the doors and all that normal stuff that they do, they also made us repeat it back to them to make sure we had comprehended what they had told us. Now for lav time, I usually talk about how I appreciate it when airlines can make the lavatory not just feel like a small white box. And unfortunately, in a budget airline in an A319, you're gonna end up with a small white box. What I did like, however, was the American flag air freshener, which was interesting on a flight from Japan to Mongolia. Now we also get to fight one of the camera's greatest battles on this flight: rain on an airplane window. Now, one other thing that I forgot that a flight attendant reminded me about is in the exit row, I do have to have my bag put up for takeoff and landing. Not to complain though, because it just gave me even more room to fully spread out. Now obviously there is no Wi-Fi or in-flight entertainment or even charging ports on board this airplane, so I did like that they had magazines in the seat back pocket. They actually had 2 different magazines. Only problem was, both of those magazines were 100% in Mongolian. The only thing that had any English in it was this guide that explains different things that you can do while you're hanging out in Ulaanbaatar. It included lists of different categories like food and hotels and stuff like that. It also included a large map of the city. You'll see 2 airports on that actually, one of which is the old airport, which was recently closed in 2021, and then at the bottom there is the new Ulaanbaatar International Airport, which is where we're going to be flying into today. I fought that rain every step of the way, but I still got our rampers waving us off to Mongolia. Now, delay times for departure were insane today. There was a long line for departures and they were only releasing one every few minutes, and there was also arriving traffic on the same runway. So I'm not quite sure how it was working with release times, but after pushback we probably sat on the tarmac waiting for departure for about 30 to 45 minutes. Now, it may not quite be the A350 winglet, which is probably the best winglet out there, but the A319 winglet does have room for a little bit of artwork, and so I do appreciate that Aero Mongolia at least slapped a logo on there. Now, if you've sat in a modern day exit row, you'll notice the window shades slide up from the bottom as opposed to sliding down from the top. The reason for this is because since the release handle for the emergency exit door is on the top, there's simply no space for that window shade to slide up, so it has to retract into the bottom. Speaking of exit row quirks, we'll take a look at a couple other things. First off, the tray table, which the tray table in and of itself is a fairly normal tray table. What's really special about exit row tray tables is the release. You'll see it doesn't actually slide in one direction. And that's so that passengers egressing don't accidentally knock it and the tray table releases, blocking the exit row. Also, there's no armrest on the side facing the door. Instead, you do have a slight armrest on the exit door itself. Now, as far as in-flight entertainment goes, I did come somewhat prepared here, downloading plenty of stuff to my laptop so I could watch that and keep myself occupied. The nice thing about a budget airline is that there's nothing under the seat, no charging ports or anything like that to take up your legroom, so you can fully extend except for the small life jackets. For power, I used my portable charger, which obviously has to be in my carry-on bag since they don't allow these to be checked, but I do use it from time to time when I am on flights like this. As I was lounging in my seat though, I finally saw that meal cart appear, which is nice because even for a budget airline, it is nice to have these meals on these flights that are 4, 5, 6 hours. I took the beef option instead of the fish option, which came with a full container of rice and beef with assorted vegetables. Aside that came a thing of cold cuts and some fruit next to that. But let's not forget the true hero of this dish, the single small piece of broccoli that made this a well-rounded meal. Now with seats like this, I'm usually expecting the same comfort level as something like Allegiant or Spirit, but this did have a recline feature, and the recline feature actually did let the seat go back pretty far. So that, combined with the fact that I had the row to myself, really I was plenty comfortable the entire flight. So I usually try to be considerate about what other people are doing on these airplanes before I just lounge out and get comfortable. So after I followed the trends of everyone else, I saw everyone else had removed their shoes and was lounging out about the cabin, so I followed their cues. By no means was I going to be the first one to do it, but I will definitely follow suit to get comfortable. After the meals were collected, I sat back to watch my favorite in-flight entertainment, a live sunset out the window of my airplane. Now, as far as the route that we took to Mongolia, I was kind of curious about it since there was no in-flight entertainment to monitor that. Really, it's what you'd expect. Obviously, we stayed clear of North Korea, but what I found most curious is between Seoul and Beijing, we climbed and descended multiple times, and you could feel it, in addition to turning back and forth over and over again. So I'm not sure exactly what was coming from ATC, what was going on there, but that was the interesting part of the flight. In addition, they do tend to lose radar coverage when you get close to Ulaanbaatar, so keep that in mind, I guess, if you're trying to track a flight, that eventually it's going to drop off radar. And with about a couple hours left in the flight, the cabin had finally reached full dark as the sun had completely set as we flew over North China. Something I realized later in the flight is that on the bulkhead they had all the immigration forms for all the different countries that they fly to, so that if you'd like to fill them out before arrival, you just have to come up to the bulkhead and grab the forms for whatever country you need and fill them out. With that though, we had finally started our descent. You'll notice you see nothing out the window. We pretty much continued to see nothing out the window the entire descent, but I still took a time lapse of it and sped it up enough that hopefully we can see a little bit more.
Ulaanbaatar хөдөлж 14 хэм хөдөл байна. Та бүхний аюулгүй байдлыг хангах үедээ сонгоцны дараа суудлын бүсний нэг юм байна. Суудлаас сууж байх гэсэн. Дэшний төрөн бол бидний дээрээс ч болж болчихлоо хэлдэг байж. Галтаж бүсэд зүйлсээ бодлого болохыг санаалаа. Та бүхний өнөөдөр Aero Mongolia компани руу шилжүүлэх хөлийн дараа болны спорт хамгаалалт талын сайхан нэмсэж байна. Баярлалаа. Хавцлаа баярлалаа. Та бүхэн чиг сайхан өнгөрүүлээ. Dear passengers, welcome to Ulaanbaatar City. We have just landed at the Chinggus International Airport in Ulaanbaatar. Now the local time is 40 minutes.
Welcome to Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. We're here at the Chinggus International Airport. This is the newer of their international airports, only about a year or two old. You can see, for example, off to the left an Aero Mongolia 135, and in addition to that, you'll see the Miat 737s. We're actually going to be flying the Miat 767s in business class in an upcoming video, so stay posted for that. I am very excited to check out all that this new airport has to offer in Ulaanbaatar and what their flag carrier has to offer in their business class cabin as well. As we got off the airplane, I was really excited to see what this brand new airport looked like. I don't think I've ever been in an airport that was this new in construction. It only has 6 gates, and they're really only using about 1 or 2 at a time. And the immigration actually only had our flight, and same as baggage claim. So the airport seemed kind of dead until we got out into the main lobby of the airport. Now, something I've started noticing at airports nowadays that I was impressed to see integrated at this new airport is that there's scanners on the baggage systems. So to avoid a pileup, they basically hold a bag at the top, and when there's a gap, it'll drop down onto the conveyor belt. That way there's not multiple bags stacked on top of each other so that everyone can access their bag. And now taking a second to explore our final thoughts of Aero Mongolia. Now look, it's a budget airline from a country which isn't exactly known for its aviation. So my standards weren't very high. Honestly, the biggest thing for them is if they could make it a little bit easier to book your flight and track your flight and plan for your flight, I think they could really grow to a bigger market. They're obviously growing to bigger markets, having acquired their A319, so I'm excited to see if they'll continue to grow, but that initial customer experience I think is what they really need to work on. Everything else though fits their brand, and while it doesn't blow me away, it was a nice Mongolian experience, and I was excited to be in this country that I had never been to. But let me know below your thoughts on Aero Mongolia. I'll have some new videos up soon, so stay posted for those. In the meantime, fly safe, and thanks for watching.